Daniel, I am at a loss here.
What's going on?
This book, dude, it is something else.
It is a lot of things, and that sounds that sounds like it's negative, but I don't mean that in the slightest. It's there are a lot of things going on there, textually, subtextually, metatextually. It's just it's I don't know. We've done quite a few books so far, at least in my estimation. And this, of all the books that we've done, I think in many ways this is the most artful one.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. I think the only thing that might come close is House of Leaves, but that it's not close to the same.
No, they're pretty different. Although ostensibly they both have that sort of maybe sort of postmodern, a little certain postmodern aspect to it, but and the sort of auspice, the broader auspice of a horror story, but that's really just kind of grasping at straws at best to liken those two together.
Yeah. Welcome to the Sad Boys Book Club. My name is Dusty,
And I'm Daniel.
and we're finishing up Beloved
Yes. We kind of just gave the in that little opening monologue. We kind of hit how we were feeling after all that, but just to kind of sum it all up, this was a really excellent book, and I don't know. I'm very very happy that we ended up doing it this month.
Yeah, I think this was a great choice from you, and I think, objectively speaking, this is probably the best book we've covered.
It's something, all right.
Yeah. Um, yeah, it's, not to sound too much like I did last week, but I really am at a bit of a loss here with this one. It's just, I don't know, it's so much to take in, and I'm still just kind of trying to parse it.
Hmm.
It probably doesn't help that I actually just finished reading it like 20 minutes ago.
Well, I guess it is kind of tough. You're kind of coming in pretty cold.
Yeah, which on the one hand you say, oh, that's really fresh, but on the other hand, it's like it hasn't quite digested yet.
Yeah.
At least not the last like two chapters or so. The last like 10 to 12 pages are what I just read.
Mhm.
Um, man,
I guess I'll ask you this, even though you may not have a real sense of things like to you know you're still kind of digesting all that. How did you feel coming away from the book?
um, a little a little empty, if I'm being honest.
It's interesting.
I'm just I'm kind of left at a loss here. Like, um, I mean, it really does just kind of end, and there's not really so much a resolution, more so than there is just a so this has happened, and now this is what we do to move forward. But I feel like the only person moving forward is Denver by the end of the book.
Well, kind of. I think there's reason to hope for Setha and Paul D. I think their final exchange towards the end, and maybe we could talk about all this, was pretty heartening, all things considered.
I don't know. I feel like there's a chance she survives, but the parallels that Paul D made to her and Baby Suggs in her bed weren't lost on me.
Yeah.
The only thing we were missing was Setha talking about colors.
Well, That's true, but like I said, there's a little bit of hope. We can get to that. Last week we didn't really summarize, so I would like to summarize this week, if we
Please.
can. I think because I think it's important that we kind of give a broader context to the story before we jump in.
Yeah, by all means, I will let you take the lead on this one because I think you will probably do it more justice than I can.
All right, sounds good. Well, so essentially, the story starts in the immediate post-war. Well, maybe not immediate, but like within less than a decade after the end of the Civil War in Cincinnati, Ohio. There is a family that lives together at this house that is comprised of the main character, Setha, her daughter, Denver, her mother-in-law, Baby Suggs, and initially her two sons, Howard and Bugler. I say initially because before really the beginning of the story, they run away. And this is something that is kind of a recurring theme, and this is one of the reasons why the sort of... You've heard of cold open, kind of a cold ending. This kind of works for me because in the time of the 1800s, it was a lot easier for people to go missing and never be heard from again, or just to leave, straight up. And as I'm sure it surprises no one, that could be doubly true for black people, just to be gone one day and never be heard from again. But anyway, and there's an initial home life, and Howard and Bugler run away. They run away because the house is haunted. There is the ghost of a baby that is living there, the ghost of Setha's oldest daughter. And this oldest daughter is a ghost, but she's perceived, at least by Baby Suggs, her mother-in-law, and Setha, not to be a particularly malicious entity. In fact, I think was it Baby Suggs or Setha herself who said the ghost isn't angry, it's just sad. I think it was Setha, actually. Is that right?
I think so.
Well, they're kind of living in a sort of isolation, partly because of the ghost, although we learn a little bit more later. But at the start of the book, it seems like the ghost is like at least, a good 60-70% of why they are isolated the way they are. Anyway, as time goes on, Baby Suggs kind of becomes increasingly infirm to the point where she is... her mind's kind of gone to a certain extent. Last week, my interpretation of that was that it was some sort of dementia or Alzheimer's or something in that vicinity. However, after getting to the end of the book, I think it becomes apparent that it is some sort of profound emotional and physical and spiritual exhaustion. But anyway, so they're living there, and Baby Suggs continues to get worse and worse. As I said, she's exhausted. She doesn't really talk. She doesn't eat. She doesn't really get out of bed. All she wants to do is contemplate colors. But crucially, and we might come back around. There's a lot of color symbolism in this book, particularly red, symbolizing all of the things red normally does. Violence, anger, hatred. All of these things. But that it is very pointedly omitted that that is pointedly omitted from Baby Suggs' color rotation. Anyway, after some time, and we're still in the first chapter here, Paul D, a formerly enslaved man who worked at the same plantation as Setha arrives. The former plantation that they worked at was called Sweet Home. So we might, I don't know how important the name is, but just for your reference there. And he moves in, and slowly over time, they begin to form something of a family unit. I think it's clear that although Paul is not really want to put firm labels on things, and that is an important aspect of his character, there is a sort of increasingly close dynamic between him and Setha, and he wants to have one between him and Denver, her daughter. However, Denver is not exactly excited about this prospect. She's kind of lived in a sort of isolation with her mother for some years. It's not. I don't think it's made explicitly clear how old she is in the novel, or how many years rather she's been in this isolated state with her mother. But it is clear that they have been together for some time. And as such, she's kind of developed something of a codependent relationship with her mother.
Real quick, she's
Sure.
18 when the book starts.
Oh, she's 18. That's a little older than I thought. I think that kind of goes back to my thing about she's been isolated so long. She has a certain childishness about her that is very, very interesting, and I don't know. I think the part of that is her isolation. But having said that, she does have a very strong relationship with her mother. Her and her mother are very, very tightly bonded. So which is kind of in contrast to Paul D, who has a sort of he wants to love, but he feels like he cannot afford to love in the same way. We can maybe touch on that a little bit, why he feels that way later, but that's central to certain conversations that Paul has, not just here at the beginning, but as the book goes along. So as Paul D moves in, they kind of begin this sort of cohabitation, and that's kind of Setha is kind of moved from this role as sort of solely mother and caretaker to this role of lover and partner kind of situation. And so that kind of stirs up dynamics between her and Paul D. It kind of, and given their shared history as having been slaves at the same plantation, it begins to sort of dredge up some sort of psychic trauma from their past. Anyway, another consequence of Paul D moving in is a sort of ad hoc exorcism that he performs that banishes the ghost in an almost comical way. He sort of just basically yells at the ghost to get out, and what was the thing? Did he smash? He didn't smash a table, but what did he smash? He
smashed a table.
He smashed a table. Okay, yeah, he basically yells at the ghost, smashes a table, and the ghost vanishes, which is which is pretty humorous to me, actually.
Yeah, I got a good chuckle out of that in my half asleep stupor.
It's kind of interesting that we see this in this moment, because the book, as I first had heard of it, it was kind of billed not as horror, but somewhat horror, a ghost story kind of situation. So for that to happen so early on, particularly because the book is very gives the ghost a very ominous presence, sort of at the beginning. Like here's from the first page. 124 was spiteful, full of a baby's venom. The women in the house knew it, and so did the children. It's just like all of this stuff. And I think we talked about this last episode, but just to re-clarify, 124 refers to their house, being that it is on 124 Bluestone Road. So anyway, as Paul kind of like moves in, and the tension, the sort of horror atmosphere is basically immediately dispelled, and it begins kind of sort of a story about a domestic family drama of sorts. And it kind of builds, and there's kind of a little bit of a push and pull between him and Denver, and Denver kind of makes some pointed remarks, and it's clear that she's kind of like tired of him hanging around and wants him to move on. And so after a conversation with Setha, where it's like it seemed like he was kind of working to maybe not quite an ultimatum, but he wanted her to take a firmer line against Denver, and he wanted Setha to sort of tell Denver to kind of respect him more and treat him a little bit more nice. But it kind of goes a little bit back. There's a little bit of a back and forth, and it kind of Paul D decides, instead of like, and this is another crucial point here. It's like there's Setha loves her children a lot, so much that there's this she's very happy and very very much enjoying this new sort of cohabitation and like burgeoning relationship with Paul, but she is like not willing whatsoever to risk or even really impose on her existing relationship with Denver to do anything about it. So this kind of pushes Paul into a different tact, and he decides, instead of maybe getting Setha to kind of crack down on Denver a little bit, maybe he's going to show her he's actually a pretty nice guy. So he takes them to a carnival, which is traveling in town, and actually it pretty much works. Denver has a great time. Setha, they're kind of having a good time, and as they're walking home, he's holding hands with Setha, she's holding hands with him and Denver. And there's this nice image of like the sun's kind of coming down, and they're seeing their shadow of like holding hands, and it's this very very nice moment. And you could be forgiven for thinking this is very strange that there was these two seemingly large complications that they seem to be fixed pretty early on. Where are we going? Well, enter. Go ahead.
Quick point of clarification: they weren't holding hands. It was that their shadows looked to Setha like they were holding hands, and she used that as like some sort of good omen for their future together.
Okay, that's right. Well, enter beloved. As they're going home, they come across a woman who is sitting, by the road, and she looks to be almost like she sort of popped into existence. Like her clothes are clean and nice. Her skin is like unblemished, undamaged. She seems to be a little bit older than Denver, but that's really all that they can glean about her. And so they talk to her a little bit, and she doesn't really have a lot of good answers for why she is there, or where she's from, really just nothing. But they kind of write it off as, well, she's had a long journey. She probably just doesn't feel well. She's probably a little sick. Let's just bring her home, let her rest, maybe give her a little food, and maybe that'll help her, and she'll be she'll move along in time. So anyway, over time, Denver and begins to sort of take on something of a caretaking role towards Beloved, and Beloved, although she very much seems to like Denver, um, seems to really be drawn to Setha. She asks her questions that about her past. She specifically asks about things that are like connected to Sweet Home, like this pair of earrings that Setha actually received in the past, from the wife of her former master. There's these earrings that were given to her as a sort of wedding present. It's not that it was a real. It was. I struggle how quite to say this, but like she was obviously, she wanted to marry her husband, a man named Hale, and they were married in a sort, but there was not the sort of pageantry and ceremony that we often associate with the wedding, and so the gift was given in a sort of, if you were to read it, you would see it was given in a very kind of patronizing way. And so that so anyway, they get along, and now that Paul D has kind of mended his situation with Denver, the situation with Beloved starts to kind of be strange. Like he's a little bit unsure of her really from the beginning, because she's not able to really answer any questions about herself or her past or where she's going, but seems to have knows a little bit about Setha. There's just something about her, and she even sort of, to him, gives off something of an aura. Beloved was shining, and Paul D didn't like it. That's how Beloved looked, gilded and shining. So there's just something about her that is kind of like projecting this sort of aura onto Paul D, and we will kind of maybe expound on that a little bit later. But anyway, as the situation kind of is unfolding domestically, we are often given these flashbacks to various people's lives, but mostly Setha, and a little bit later Paul D. We get this part of Setha's escape from Sweet Home, where she's on the run, and she's heavily pregnant with Denver, and she's pretty much dying, and she's trying to get to the Ohio River to cross over into Ohio, when she meets this white woman named Amy Denver, who is a little bit of a strange character. I know, Dusty, you mentioned something about her last week.
Yeah, I just wanted to eventually get to a point where we could talk about this whole sequence. So yeah.
And so they're going, and it's very sort of Adventures of Huck Finn kind of vibe. I think there's sort of that. It's this sort of like alliance between like this sort of very young and destitute sort of white worker, white young person kind of, and this sort of this enslaved woman, in the case of Setha. And they sort of, and even though Amy is not what we would consider very tactful, her heart seems to be in the right place, as she seems to be, very gentle with Setha. She's very instrumental, in fact, in getting her across the river. She's very, Setha has to stop because she has, bad swelling in her legs, and I think she had been freshly beaten at the time, and so she helps to sort of kind of care for her a little bit, and she kind of begins this pattern where she sees the beginnings of the scarring take place on Setha's back after the beating that she took immediately prior to escaping from Sweet Home, and she refers to it as looking like a chokecherry tree, and that is something that's sort of emblematic of Setha's character, sort of like this scar that looks like a tree. We see it in the scene, the intimate sequences with her and Paul D, where he's kissing her scar and all of that. It's a very tangible reminder and symbol of her time and of as a slave. So anyway, they go ahead and they get her across the river, and she helps give birth to Denver. She essentially midwifes Denver, and they are and then they part on good terms, and she presumably heads towards Boston, which is where she was looking to go. Was there something specific you wanted to talk about there?
Not anything hyper specific, just kind of I don't know, I just thought it was a really good section with, like you said, this kind of Huck Finn-esque kind of thing of these unlikely, for lack of a better term, bedfellows in this situation, and just the almost comedy of it.
Yeah, it is in a certain way very darkly comic, because Amy is going on about what is that sort of fabric that velvet?
Yeah.
And she's like, yeah, you don't know anything about velvet, do you? And Setha, who's trying not to die, is just like, no, I don't know anything about velvet. Just it is darkly comedic in that way. But it is, in the end, ultimately, Amy is a force for good, because she is, like I said, she's very helpful and in a way very tender with Setha, who is in a very vulnerable spot. And as you probably picked up, her name being Amy Denver, Setha's daughter is named Denver, so obviously she made quite an ultimately very positive impression on Setha. Paul D recalls an experience he had as a member of a chain gang, and it is it is about the worst that you could imagine, being a black man on the chain gang in the 1800s. I forget exactly. I think he was because at the time. We don't necessarily have the full context of why he is on the chain gang, but I think it is related to his attempted escape that he was also trying to effect at the same time as Seth. They were part of a plan of several slaves to try to escape from the plantation due to deteriorating conditions. But anyway, he's on the chain gang. He is being I don't want to go quite into extreme detail, but he's being abused in every imaginable way, and all of the slaves are, and it is genuinely a stomach turning passage. Just reading about Yeah, just the raw evil and avarice that was being displayed to them. So anyway, eventually, they're kind of left in something of an enclosure, and it begins to sort of rain, and the enclosure floods, and with the flooding, Paul D and some of the other slaves are finally able to escape, and he kind of wanders through the wilderness. I think they pretty much go their separate ways because, they figure they would have better luck if it was just a group of them going. It would probably, draw attentions, word would spread. So they just essentially all go their own way.
Well, if I remember
And
right, it's like some do because there were 46 of them, and others because they get picked up by basically a group of Cherokee.
well, I thought Paul D kind of stumbled on them.
I think it was at the very least some of them. I think some of them went on their separate ways, but others stayed together, and that's how they found that's how they stumbled upon the group of Cherokee men.
Okay. Well,
I could be a little off. It's It's been
I'm glad you're here to clarify these things because I'm trying to give a very broad summary because there's a lot I'm trying to capture a whole book. So I'm sure if I overgeneralize or misremember, please hop in and clarify. So anyway, Paul D and he comes on this group of Cherokee, and they actually help him. They're very instrumental in his freedom in a certain respect because he is still chained up when he makes it to them. So they are able to cut his chains and kind of give him a general understanding of the situation and where he needs to go and that kind of thing. So that is actually a very, very nice moment, a very sort of a very powerful moment in terms of the sort of a solidarity between two oppressed peoples, and it kind of brings to mind things like the during like the civil rights movement and in the aftermath of that and the American Indian movement and the that sort of. If I had to guess, I would say something like that might also have been a little bit present in Morrison's mind, if not just the general sense of solidarity between oppressed peoples. Anyway, he basically kind of continues to sneak his way north, and he runs into he sees people along the way that are kind of in similar circumstances as him, some very young, and this is kind of what I was referencing earlier, is like there's like a lot of, for reasons that are usually kind of dark, a lot of young men, young black men specifically, they have to take to the road in these times, and they just kind of disappear one day, and they kind of have to fend for themselves, and it is very sad. It's just anyway, it's just unthinkable to think that that's how it was at one point. So he continues to go head north, and he eventually finds this woman in Delaware, and he stays with her for a good time. But ultimately, I think the way that it is portrayed in the book, maybe a little bit as a result of his trauma, he is not able to stay in one place for very long, and this is kind of something that he kind of we talked about. He does not want to get too attached because he's seen it happen in other people that he's known, and from the Sweet Home era, he's seen people that they get attached to another person, and then you just see something terrible happens, and it just mentally destroys them. When something bad happens, which happened quite a lot in his in the experience of black people and his personal experience. So anyway, after that, they kind of we're kind of back to the present more or less, and Setha and Denver and Beloved go on a little bit of a remembrance slash hike to this clearing in the woods where Baby Suggs used to how quite to put it, do spiritual gatherings, um, and we kind of get a little bit of the context of Baby Suggs. She was a sort of like, what? How did they put it? Was it like an unchurched preacher, something like that?
Yeah, she went calling, I think is what they called it.
Yeah, she basically gave sermons of a sort there, and they kind of hosted religious, or spiritual gatherings, and it was very nice, very very important for the black community in Cincinnati, as when she lived there. I guess I should probably mention, Baby Suggs was her freedom was purchased by her son, Hale, who was essentially able to take on extra work. He was able to convince his owner, Gardner, Mr. Gardner, and he takes on these things like on Sundays and at night, and he's able to gather a little bit of money to purchase the freedom of his mother, who is quite old and disabled. So essentially, that he's able to get enough money, and then she's taken to Cincinnati, and she's kind of essentially in a way that was, I thought, was very kind of interesting. We showed how she kind of is kind of integrated into the local community, and that's a very interesting portion of the book in and of itself. But it's just I don't know. That essentially, though, we were kind of at the clearing, and Setha is kind of talking about all these things, and she kind of like, she's sitting there, and she's kind of like talking about how Baby Suggs would kind of rub her neck, and as she kind of has her eyes closed, and she kind of feels these fingers begin to massage her neck. And at first she's kind of like, oh, this is kind of nice, but the fingers begin to choke her, and she's concerned. She's like, she thinks that it's Beloved massaging her, and then it's choking, and then she kind of snaps into reality, and then there's like this sort of awkward moment where especially Denver is aghast because she thinks that Beloved just tried to kill her mom, and but Beloved is not. She says that didn't happen. Anyway, speaking of Beloved and what she's doing, she's exerting this sort of unnatural force on Paul D that's making hits so that he's beginning to feel very uncomfortable and uneasy in the house. Like he gets forced out of Setha's bedroom, and he tries to go to another room, and after a while there too, he's kind of like forced downstairs into the cold house. So he's basically being driven out of the house like over time. And at one night when he is sleeping in the cold house, Beloved enters the cold house, and essentially using that power, that influence over him, coerces him into having sex with her. and that kind of that begins that kind of like sets Paul D down a pretty dark path. He of remembering things that were very painful, and also driving him out of the house, which is, as Beloved tells Denver later, what she wants. She wants Paul D to leave 124. And let's see, I'm trying to think about. I think there's a. Then we kind of get a little bit back to the baby Suggs story, and she's waiting in Cincinnati for her son and Setha to escape, and for their children to come, and a few others to come from Sweet Home. And they've gotten word over there that there's a plan. They're getting ready to receive them, and she's getting a party together. But only Setha arrives, and to baby Suggs' credit, even though I'm sure she was heartbroken that her son never turned up, she nevertheless is rejoicing that Setha and her grandchildren were able to escape. And so she hosts this big celebration, and the community comes out, and it is quite the lavish affair. They talk about like all these pies and all this food that's been prepared, and it is just a real bounty, and it is really good, but it kind of rubs people the wrong way in a way that is difficult, at least from my vantage point, to understand. Is this she is kind of given over to the feeling that she's offended them with this sort of exaggerated sense of pride, and maybe kind of rubbing it in their face a little bit, and to that end she begins to get this sort of sense that something bad is coming. So because of this sort of sense of enmity that the community developed as a result of the well-intended party, they don't really give advance warning to the people at 124 that this is gonna happen, and so they're taken unawares. And Setha, as she sees a school teacher coming, she gathers her children, and she kind of goes to the shed in the back. And when they burst into the shed, they see that she has already killed one child with a saw, and is preparing to kill. I think in the instant that we're seeing it, she sees the other. They see like Howard and Bugler. They're kind of like standing off to the side, kind of with this sort of sense of abject horror. And she's swinging. I think she's getting ready to swing Baby Denver against this post, and in an attempt to kill her.
Yeah, this scene was tough.
This is a very horrendous scene. And I think it's very upsetting, and but from Setha's perspective, she's been traumatized, and I think I've skipped over a lot of stuff. I don't know how good a job I'm actually doing here, but there's a bunch of incidents that have happened that we've seen in Setha's past that are just very just unimaginable, like abuse and pain, and she is in this moment reacting in this way to try to save, in some sense, her children from being subjected to the same sort of experience.
Yeah, there
She's
was.
trying. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. There was this great line that was said by. It might have been her actually when she's talking to somebody about it, where it said she was trying to out hurt the herders.
Yeah.
It was something
Yeah,
like that.
I think that was her. But that was. It's a really tough scene. But, from her perspective, a recently escaped, enslaved woman, she had no real way of knowing or having any faith that her children would ever receive emancipation. And, because at that time, they it's not like they were keeping their slaves up to date on like the the state of the political discourse. And I'm sure they weren't able, many weren't able to read or write. And so I think she was just in this moment of just genuine and profound horror and terror. She does she's the only thing she can to prevent the children from being slaves. And but when the four men who came to bring them back kind of burst in, they kind of see this. And well, the school teacher, he gets pretty annoyed, and he's just like, this she's too crazy to work. And then he basically kind of storms off and takes his nephew and the slave catcher with him, and they get ready. They just leave, and the sheriff kind of takes her into custody. And this is a story that is later related by a man named Stamp Paid, who was one of the men. He was there to witness it. I think he was in the yard chopping some wood when it happened.
Yeah, he was the one that found Setha after Amy left her, and the one that brought her to Baby Suggs in the first place. He was also the one that picked the blackberries that they used for that big party, the 2 buckets full. And he's the one that rescued Denver from Setha as she was trying to swing her into the wall.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's how he kind of has a first-hand knowledge of it, but he also has this printing from a newspaper that has an account of the event, and he tries to tell Paul D about it, and Paul D is a little bit. He's disbelieving at first, even though you can tell he's kind of realizing what is happening, and he's just trying to give any sort of excuse that he can to not believe it. But it is he could tell that it is in fact the truth. And so he comes home, and he talks to Setha about it. And well, it doesn't go well, because Setha, she's still pretty unapologetic about the whole thing. She's like, no, I did what I had to do. I had to do that to prevent them from being enslaved. And Paul D, and this is one that you can really see that the skill of Morrison as a writer, because both characters have very strong arguments, and both are very well stated. But essentially the argument breaks down, and he says, you have 2 legs, not 4, as he's leaving, kind of insinuating, kind of in a very insulting way, that she is not human for what, or acting in an inhuman way for doing what she did. And I think it's one of the things that's interesting is, I think while there is some sort of judgment on the part of the characters, they react to Seth's decision in a lot of different ways. I don't think Morrison herself comes down too hard one way or the other, or at the very least, she kind of leaves it for the reader to sort of puzzle out this sort of unthinkable and incredible choice. Not incredible in a good way, but like just unbelievable. Just something that, and I don't want to really moralize too deeply. I think this is. I'm sure there are some sort of philosophers that would just have a field day with this. I tend to believe this is something that you could think you would know what you would do in this kind of circumstance. I don't think you can really know unless you were in the circumstance, and I think what you might do could potentially surprise you. And that's really all that I have to say about it. I think I don't want to necessarily dig too deep into this choice. I just think it's a very well presented moral dilemma.
Yeah, and it's one of those things to where it's like I understand completely her logic and her reasoning behind it. I see it. I'm not like confused by it, but it's one of those things to where I just I could never ever support that decision. I think she was remarkably in the wrong. I think that's a pretty safe thing to say. But all that being said, I do agree with the sentiment that was brought forward that if she didn't do what she did, her children would have probably died by the hands of school teacher or someone else. One way or the I do think that she changed the fate of her surviving children by killing her oldest daughter, but it just kind of it turns into a question of, can you justify saving 3 lives by taking one? This is very much a massive philosophical discussion that like I also don't want to get too into the weeds about, but I do think that she did technically, by as much of a technicality as you can have, save the lives of her other children by doing that. But what she did was unforgivable.
I think Morrison, like I said it best. Is like she. I wish I remembered the exact phrasing, but it was like essentially she made the right call ultimately, but she had no right to do it.
Yeah, and I think that is a very, very correct way to put that, because it is an unspeakable act for sure.
Yeah. Let's see. So after all of that happens, Stamp begins to feel bad because he starts to kind of question his own motive for revealing Setha's past to Paul D. Whether there was some sort of like, I don't know, some sort of like lingering resentment that he had towards Setha, and he kind of goes to like check in on them because they, just to see how they're doing. And as he arrives to the 124, he hears strange noises and strange voices coming from the house, and kind of like filling him with this sense of immense dread. And as he looks through the window, he sees Beloved. So, meanwhile, kind of in the house, Setha, who is increasingly falling under the influence of Beloved, begins to kind of experience these sort of stream of conscious remembrances of her past. And these are done in a very interesting way. They can be very difficult to parse at times. At least I had a hard time. Maybe I'm Maybe I'm signaling my weakness as a reader, perhaps. But
No, you are not alone there.
it can be difficult to kind of parse what she's saying, but you kind of over time you kind of develop a little bit of a facility in kind of what she is talking about, right? And one of the she begins to kind of one of the things I remember her talking about, in addition to just her past remembrances, is like her she essentially she's can't let go. She can't forgive herself for the she's in a true mental bind where she cannot forgive herself for what she did to her, her first child, and but at the same time she cannot dissociate herself from the immense feeling of love that drove her to kill her. I know that sounds strange, but again, remember the context of the moment where she had to make that decision, and she's kind of like in this sort of like unresolvable sort of mental thing. It is like there's no way to really square these two conflicting realities, and so she's kind of tortured by that. And I think there's we also get a little bit of the internal monologue of Denver, and of which is essentially her being very concerned about what's happening. And she loved Beloved because and this is something that I wish I had commented on earlier, but the characters have come, Setha and initially Denver, come to believe that this girl Beloved is the reincarnation of Setha's, or some kind of reincarnation is the best way I can put it, of Setha's eldest daughter. One of the clues that we talked about this last time was the etching into her tombstone of she was only able to afford just the word beloved. And as we said last week, that was kind of my initial hint that, oh, that's what's going on here. Anyway, but the characters themselves at this point have become convinced that that is what's going on. And anyway, Denver's having to navigate this feeling where she's like, yes, I love my sister, and this ghost has kept me company through these many years, even though we were very alone. And I loved that was actually the source of her negative feeling towards Paul D. was he essentially exorcised the house of Beloved. And that was so now, so in that moment she felt like she was really and truly alone, despite I think there's still a argument to be made that she had some sort of a trauma of a sort, of because she had really only her mother to rely on and socialize with, even those many years. So, and then there's this chapter that is like the free kind of the thoughts of Beloved, and that was one that I really struggled to understand. But
dude, I couldn't tell you a thing that happened in that one.
There was a lot of references to like men without skin, and basically what I came away with it was that Beloved, she was not in a restful afterlife. She was tortured not only by her own sort of violent end, but also there was like and obviously the fear she must have felt, and pain and all of that. Um, Even though she was essentially a baby at the time, but her, is nevertheless experienced, an unbelievable sort of pain, fear, and though she may not have had words for it, a sense of betrayal by Setha, given, again, she was a baby. But anyway, she has a very disorganized way of speaking and thinking, and it's kind of haunting. Just basically all of these chapters are like Setha towards the end kind of sounds almost like she's like brainwashed, and brainwashed by Beloved, and it's very. This part was very scary. Actually, it was very chilling. Brainwashed, possessed, what have you. And however you want to sort of describe that. And it's things like this that give me the sort of. There are sort of dissenting opinions that you will find floating out and about in writing about the book that you'll find online, where people will argue that Beloved was not necessarily a sort of evil reincarnation, but rather a woman that was kept in some sort of like I don't know. It was I struggle to remember exactly what the point they were trying. But they were saying there are hints given throughout the book that Beloved may have been this other woman that was maybe not kidnapped exactly, but was being kind of held against her will in sort of like this. She was kind of a prisoner of sorts, or was like enslaved after the time of slavery, that kind of thing. And I don't know. I just think between this and this sort of weird energy she's able to exert on Paul D to compel him to do things, I don't know. I don't have a lot of sympathy for this idea of her being not a supernatural presence in some way. But anyway, that's kind of beside the point. We'll go ahead and try to wrap up relatively quick. As things go along, there is this nice moment where they're kind of skating on the, and it seems like things are being good, and they've created this new family. But there's things kind of rapidly begin to worsen shortly after that, with Setha becoming more frail and more dominated by Beloved, who seems very eager to sort of use Setha's sense of guilt and her sense of guilt against her. And Setha will, kind of fight back every now and again, but ultimately is pretty browbeaten by Beloved, who is basically given everything she wants, like whether that is fancy clothes or food of any kind. Setha begins to get later and later into work until eventually she is fired, and she's okay with that because now she can spend more time with Beloved, and it's really, really dark. This is a really dark portion of the book, and it shows a very unhealthy dynamic here. Denver, good.
This could be me a little off base a bit, but it felt to me like a bit of a manifestation of grief.
I mean, I don't think that's wrong. I think there's a big portion of that. I think Beloved exists not just as like a, excuse me, Beloved exists not just as like a character or a malevolent entity, or however you want to feel about her, but she exists also as a sort of metaphor for like the past and like the trauma, the grief, all of the painful experiences of slavery kind of made into a person. So she exists as both character and metaphor, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean that's not uncommon.
No, and no, certainly not. I think, and there's even things that we've even said some characters are not really characters; they're metaphors or plot devices. But in this case, she very much is a character, but also a metaphor.
Yeah.
So, go ahead.
I was gonna say, and it makes for uh, some very vivid imagery.
Yeah, there's a lot of vivid imagery. I wish we could get into some more of this, but I think we're kind of getting a little bit long, and we're close to the end, so we might as well wrap up. And so anyway, as Setha continues to kind of fall more and more under the spell of Beloved, things get pretty destitute over 124, and Denver is kind of forced into a situation where she has to leave. And I'm sure this is a very I'm sure this rang true for many people who've read it. It's just like a very, not that this is something I know of personally, but I've known people that they are just in these very unhealthy environments, and then just that one day, even if they by most objective standards are not really ready to be out in the world, are essentially like, I just gotta go. Like I can't live like this anymore. And so she kind of goes, and she meets some people in the community, and they kind of point her into the direction of the Bodwins, who are this brother and sister duo that have kind of, since the days of slavery, kind of been, they were like, they were abolitionists, and they've kind of they've essentially been trying to do what they can to sort of help the black community. And so they kind of point her in that direction, and she kind of meets their maid Janie, and they kind of like talk about it, and she essentially spills what's happening there. And this is, and that kind of works its way. There's a scene where it kind of works its way through the rumor mill, and the people of the town kind of, they realize that in some ways this is their fault too. This is their mess, because they were not they didn't stand up for her or they didn't stand up for Setha, or at least warn them in the past. It has created this situation that where Setha is now literally and figuratively imprisoned by the past. And so they go, and they kind of works its way through the rumor mill, and Denver is at home, and she's waiting for the Bodwins to pick her up for work, because they live in town, she lives a little bit out in the country. And so two things are kind of happening at the same time. Mr. Bodwin is kind of like in his carriage, and he's going back, and he's kind of having memories and recollections of his days as an abolitionist, and he's remembering, because that's actually his house on 124 Bluestone Road, and he's kind of remembering things that happened at the house many years ago. And while that's happening, a group of people are beginning to gather in the community, and they're beginning to walk towards the house, and as they go along, more people are joining them. And they get towards, as they get to 124, and they get there a little bit before Mr. Bodwin, and they're kind of in a sort of religious ecstasy of a kind, and they're in an attempt to kind of to exorcise the evil of the house. And at the same time, we got Mr. Bodwin, who is approaching, and he sees him coming for sure. Setha sees him coming. She knows he's coming for Denver, and in her sort of deteriorated mental state, she grabs an ice pick and tries to attack Mr. Bodwin, mistaking him as for school teacher coming back to try to claim them again. And but Denver essentially stops her from this, and the other women kind of like wrestle her to the ground. But in the confusion, Beloved disappears. And this is very interesting to me because it's in a strange way. It doesn't really resolve in the usual way. There's no great conflagration. There is no fight between Denver and Beloved, or Setha and Beloved, or anything like that. It's just in the confusion, Beloved disappears, and we don't know what happens. And I'm sure that if you are just kind of following along from my description, you haven't read the book, perhaps that might seem anticlimactic. And certainly when I first read it, I couldn't believe it. I just kept rereading like the 2 or 3 page stretch like a few times, just to be like, what am I missing here? But that's just kind of what it is. And I think that is true of just the way that the book is and it is true of that experience at that time that I keep hitting back on. This is a time was very unsettled. Things happened, you knew someone, suddenly that person was gone, and that kind of thing. And I think that sort of sense of dislocation, that sort of it is part and parcel of what Morrison is communicating in this book. And so after all that happens, it's kind of, we see Denver, and she runs into Paul D on her way to work. And Denver everything is different about her, but in a good way. She seems a lot more mature, and especially in her way of speaking. She seems to have her own sort of like composure, and I don't know, it's very heartening. She seems to be kind of putting her life together. She's doing so much better, and Paul D is talking to her, and he kind of, in a way that was very interesting, almost asks for Denver's permission to go talk to her mom. And she's like, well, she essentially just lets him, and he goes in there, and he kind of reconnects with Setha, who is at this point bedridden, and she just cannot she just can't get out of bed. And he likens her to, as you said, to Baby Suggs. He's like, don't you die on me. This is Baby Suggs' bed. Is that what you're planning? That he's kind of he is kind of worried that she has gone the way of Baby Suggs, who kind of was so beat down by her life towards the end, and all the all of the terrible things that had happened to her. It was just too much, and she was just done. He's asked her, what are you planning? She's oh, I don't have no plans at all. And he's saying, hey, Denver's gonna be here. She'll take care of you during the day. I'll come take care of you at night. Here, come on. He's just like, let me bathe you, and he's trying to he's trying to reconnect with her. He's trying to start taking care of her, and she kind of is like, she's not having it at first, and she kind of rejoins. She asks him if he's there to count her feet. Kind of circling us back to that argument. And he says, "No, I'm here to rub your feet," to kind of indicate that he's kind of. So I don't think I ever mentioned it, but I mentioned I did mention it in passing, but we're kind of back to Paul D being afraid to love. He is now no longer afraid to love. He's here, to care for her and to try to help her to get better, to live, out however many years she may have left, and I don't know. I think it is kind of pretty. It goes pretty well. I mean, they talk a little bit, and I'm just flipping through, and he basically, well, she talks here. There's something here at the end that needs some contextualization. When she talks about when she's going back on her sort of recollection of her murdering beloved, or her killing beloved, however you want to say it, she has like she talks about how beloved and her children are her best thing, and they represent the part of her that is unsullied. And she talks about how the sort of the racism and slavery that she experienced had and abuse that she suffered had a sort of sullying effect. It dirtied her. It was something to the effect of, it dirtied you to the point where you didn't even like yourself anymore, that kind of thing. And she did not want slavery to sully her best thing, which for her is her children. And it kind of ends with this. Paul D says, he leans over and takes her hand. With the other, he touches her face. "You are your best thing, Setha. You are." His holding fingers are holding hers. Me? And that's kind of how that part ends. And it's I don't know. I think it kind of ends on a somewhat hopeful note. I like to think, for the last, let's call it 20 years of their life, or hopefully longer, Paul and Setha, could be together, and to the extent that they could, kind of move on from their past and built a relatively happy life together.
Yeah, and I feel like for all intents and purposes, that is the end of the book, despite there being 2 more pages after that.
Mm-hmm.
But those last 2 pages are more kind of like a culmination of what Beloved was, it feels like.
Yeah, and this kind of goes on, you're saying, to the fate of Beloved. It was it's kind of interesting because it's also kind of creepy in its way, where it's everybody knew what she was called, but nobody anywhere knew her name. Disremembered and unaccounted for, she cannot be lost because no one is looking for her. And even if they were, how can they call her if they don't know her name? Although she has claim, she is not claimed. In the place where long grass opens, the girl who waited to be loved and cry shame erupts into her separate parts to make it easy for the chewing laughter to swallow her all away. It was not a story to pass on. And it goes on, kind of in that sort of vein, and it just, every paragraph, ending with, "It was not a story to pass on." I don't know. It kind of goes on, and it kind of ends with down by the stream in the back of 124, her footprints come and go. They are so familiar. Should a child, an adult, place his feet in them, they will fit. Take them out, and they will disappear again as though no one ever walked there. By and by, all trace is gone, and what is forgotten is not only the footprints, but the water too, and what is down there. The rest is weather, not the breath of the disremembered and unaccounted for, but the wind in the eaves, or spring ice thawing too quickly. Just weather. Certainly no clamor for a kiss. Beloved. And that's how it ends. And so that sort of brings to mind the dedication, 60 million and more, referencing, of course, the slavery, and the victims of slavery and all that. And so I think that kind of goes back into what we're talking about. Our beloved, who did not ever really get to live her own life, existed as this sort of free-floating, semi-corporeal, semi-conscious, well, maybe fully, I don't know, but this sort of semi-formed amalgamation of pain, of suffering, and of the the experience and traumas of slavery. But like I said, that kind of ends on a kind of creepy and ominous note. But in other ways, I feel like certainly, Denver. Well, let's just be honest here. She's not going to have an easy life, but her life seems to be going in the right direction, and Setha and Paul D seem to be going in the right direction. And I think, in a sad way, that's kind of the best you can hope for. There may not be a true happily ever after for these people, but at least they have each other, and at least they are kind of coming to terms with what has happened to them. And so initially I was planning on saying all of that in about 30 minutes. I don't know. I have not watched the timer. We are at, oh my god, an hour.
Yeah, don't worry, I
minutes.
have.
So, hopefully you guys got something of that. I was hoping to do a little bit more analysis, but I feel like even just that sort of bare bones, in my opinion, just amateurish and bare bones retelling of Beloved was a lot. And I tried to relate what I could. And I think, I strongly recommend this book. There is a lot really going on in there. There's stuff we didn't get to. There's stuff that's in greater detail than we had time for, or it's a phenomenal book. It is probably one of the best books, if not the best book we've covered, and I cannot recommend this enough. I recommend this genuinely. I think everybody should read it. It is not always an easy read. I will say that there's content, as I am oft saying nowadays, content warning all. It's just like anything bad that you could think of and be concerned about that in this kind of story, it pretty much happens, and it is very dark in a lot of ways. But there is a very strong and very human thread running through it, and it is ultimately very heartening, very touching, and very nourishing in a way. It may not be the fun read always. I mean, there are entertaining aspects of it, certainly, but it is pretty dark, and it is very nourishing, and I think it is something that I would strongly recommend. I think you will not regret reading it, certainly. I think it is a great book, and that's about it. I think that's all I have to say.
Yeah, I feel like the best way I can describe this book is it feels necessary, and I think I said as much last week as well. But I don't really have another word I feel is kind of apt for me. And it's I don't know, it's such a weird place to be, because there's, like I said earlier, I just kind of left feeling empty, and I don't want that to sound like it was out of disappointment or any feelings of like lackluster or anything like that. It's I'd say it's closer to your statement of it being nourishing than anything else. My comment of feeling empty, because it's like it's almost like after you go through a very intense and arduous task, and afterwards you have that sense of relief, that sense of like emptiness, and that sense of like, I guess, closure, for lack of a better term.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just kind of where I'm at with this, to where it's like I feel like I don't know. It's really tough to explain. I don't know if I'm doing it any justice, but it's such a weird feeling of just sorrow and hope. Cuz like, knowing what I know, living in insert current year here, I think it's safe to say that conditions have improved. So there is a sense of hope, especially on Denver's end, of a future. I personally believe that Paul D and Setha, I don't, I didn't necessarily pick up a hope for the future for them. I saw it more as a grasping for a future, like trying to find that hope where there was none, but trying to find that hope in each other when there's nothing left in either of them. But I think that extends mostly to Denver, because Denver is the one that has a future, has as close as we can say to a happy ending. And I don't know. I'm feeling very scatterbrained. But I feel like this was a book about humanity at its core. All of the good and all of the bad, just kind of laid out in its purest, rawest, most unapologetic form. And that makes for a very conflicting read, to say the least.
Sure.
So I don't know how I feel at this point. Not truly. Like I said, I feel like this book was necessary. I feel like it's given me something to look at that I could not have seen otherwise. And it's just,
That's kind of what I mean by nourishing. By the way, I don't mean like chicken soup for the soul, because this is a very harrowing read. But it's like, that's what I'm saying. Is like it's needed, and it gives you, if you engage with it in the right way, I think it gives you. It gives you a better perspective of the world and of the context that we live in.
yeah. And I feel like there's no better way to try to better yourself than to put yourself out there into experiences that are not comfortable, that are not safe. And not safe like, oh, you could hurt yourself or die, but like safe like your safe space, your safe zone. Things that make you feel uncomfortable, things that make you question things you might have thought in the past, things that ostensibly broaden your horizons. And I'd say even something as simple as a book can do that. And I'd say that this is a book that does do that. And that, once again, and I've said this quite a few times now, is one of the reasons why I feel like this book is necessary, because this is a book that shows you, despite it being fiction.
Well, it's based on a true story, actually.
Oh,
I
is
mean,
it?
like the ghost and all that, but like Morrison, pardon me, Morrison talked about, when she was inspired by, she was like doing some research on another, or editing another book, and she ran across this news article from the 1850s about this woman who killed her children in the very similar way that Setha did, and how it became this sort of moment where people, especially abolitionists or people that are on the fence, were really reckoning with how terrible slavery was, and it was a real gut check moment for a lot of people. Like, what are we doing?
Yeah. Well,
but that, the beloved and all that I mean, they take on fictionalized elements, but the core of that is like, this is real.
Yeah, and that does still go in line with what I was going to say, because what I was going to say is, while this is fiction, this is a story about truth.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, yeah, you picked a great book for February. So, yeah.
Well, I guess with that, there's really nothing else to say. Please check out this book. I'd usually just kind of leave it there, but this is my genuine. I am genuinely asking anybody who is listening to this that has not read the book, that read it for a class in high school or college or whatever, and maybe didn't look at it very deeply, maybe just kind of skimmed over it. Like, anyway, all this to say, I strongly encourage everybody to read this book. It's a wonderful book. And yeah, thank you everybody for listening. This has been another episode of Sad Boys Book Club, and we'll see you next time.
Yep, take care.